as a new site user to SharePoint, you might have a few questions that we should just get out of the way, like what, in fact, even is SharePoint? So SharePoint can kind of go under a lot of different guises, but the best way to think about it is part website design platform / document storage solution. So SharePoint creates websites. You're primarily going to access it through the browser. There's a couple different times when you might access it through Office or Outlook or things like that, but you're primarily accessing it through the browser, and you're going to do all the stuff you need to do inside the browser. So it is a website design program. It's meant to be relatively codeless, so you shouldn't have to do too much coding, if none at all, to be able to build the types of information site dissemination that you want to do. Now, it's also a document storage solution. So one of the things that's going to be in SharePoint is we're going to be able to store files in SharePoint. We're going to be able to store information in SharePoint, and people can access them. So SharePoint is going to be built in these things called site collections. Every site collection of SharePoint starts with a top-level site. Now, this might be it. This could be your entire site collection, just the top-level site, and that's it. It's like buying a nice little shack by a lake so that you could stay there, but then go play in the lake all day. This really doesn't have to have bedrooms, doesn't have to have all these different walls, just a nice little four walls and a roof. So SharePoint could just be one site. There will be a lot of sites designed that way. It's also possible to build subsites. Now, this is the job of the site owner mostly, but I will tell you right now, the idea of subsites is not purely organizational. It should have a lot to do with access and permissions. So one of the things we're going to talk about in a video soon enough is what permissions you should expect in SharePoint and what access you should expect, which then explains an important point. SharePoint gives you access. It does not you don't just have it. Someone has to grant you access to each of these sites, to all the items and things like that inside of it. And so SharePoint permissions are going to be one of the big selling points and one of the parts of working with a SharePoint site. Now, we could have one top-level site. We could have some subsites below it. Either way, inside these items, we're going to find apps. Now, apps can be libraries or lists or other connections to third-party software like DocuSign or Adobe or things like that. And these connections allow you to interact with these third-party apps. The libraries and lists are the two major components of SharePoint. So in SharePoint, all the stuff you want to store there will go inside one of these apps. So a library is a SharePoint container that holds documents. In your libraries, you will upload files. This is where your Excel files go, your PDFs, your zip files, your Word, your Access, your Adobe. Whatever types of files you need to upload, they will be stored in a library. Libraries are meant for files. The setup and pieces that they use are meant for this sort of container. Lists are other type of data we can use. Lists contain simply data. They do not have a file component. So you could have a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of data inside of it, but that's still a file. It's still an Excel spreadsheet. If you took the data out of it and saved it as its own entity, as a table, that would be a list. So a list is a SharePoint component that only contains data. You enter items into a list by filling out a form, either one that's built by SharePoint or one that you customize or the site owner customizes. Once the data is in the list, you can view it in different ways on the page. You can filter it, you can create views, and data can, of course, be exported out into Excel for the final analysis and so forth. Contact lists, task lists, calendars, announcements lists, products lists, sales lists, anything that is just data that does not need a file component will work as a list. One of the things I tend to tell site owners in the later classes is that in a SharePoint site, as your site owner becomes more competent and more powerful with his or her own SharePoint knowledge, that tends to coincide with the creation of more and more lists. So you'll have a lot of libraries in your site, but the more lists you have, it just kind of means the more integrated and powerful your SharePoint site might be. It might do a lot more than you would expect it to do. So SharePoint is going to be this site collection, this collection of sites, kind of as like a house. Access to the house will be limited. You'll have to have the key to get in through the front door. Inside the house, the different rooms and number of rooms and components, stuff like that, are going to be subsites as well as these different applications, libraries and lists. And so everything goes there. Even the web pages that you're going to be looking at are files that live inside of a library called your site pages. Now in the coming videos, we're going to talk about accessing SharePoint. We're going to talk about how the permissions work. We're going to talk about how to add things to all these items, what the interface looks like, and all of that. But now, at the very least, you have an idea of how SharePoint works and what you need to know to get started.